Hello there, it's Paul here and welcome along everyone. So those of you who follow me on social media will have realised that I've been doing an awful lot of pyrography work lately and I'm still continuing on that, and I thought I would do like a mini series of some of the clocks that I make, how I go about it. So it's probably going to be a three-part series, one on the design, all the thought process, cutting the segment and gluing up all the segment ready to go on the lathe. The second part will probably be where I actually do all the turning on the lathe, and then the last part will be the actual pyrography with it all glued together. Now, I did put a video up a little while ago which was of one of the segmental clocks I did with pyrography, and I found a few mistakes while doing that. For example, I hadn't made the wood thick enough so that I had to actually, it sticks out from the wall a bit. As I found as I'm going along further along, I'm finding more and more little things. I mean, that was the next one I actually did there, which was the rose. After that was the owl. Both of these are oak and sapele inserts. This is my latest one. It's a Lighthouse, and as you'll see, got some wires dangling there, and the reason there is I've actually put a resin insert in here, and on the back it's actually, I've cut back out on the side here, then I've wired all these LEDs in. There's blue and white LEDs there, and again a little bit of segmented ply just to hold them all in place, and the idea is that the LEDs then shine into the sides here and you do get some light come through there. So where do I start then with the clocks? Well, don't go rushing out making the segments first. The first thing you really need to do is buy yourself the movement. Here's one of the ones I've got the hands packed separately. Right, now the reason you really need to buy this first, there's two things. First of all, the hand length. But what you'll actually find is a lot of the descriptions on the actual pages, they will list the hand lengths. They won't actually necessarily be from the centre point on the spindle of the movement out to the edge. What they'll actually be is, for example, like I know the second hand in here is actually about 130mm long, but it's actually 90mm from the centre point. So it's one reason why you want to buy these first. So the second point, which is just important, is on the movement itself. It's this actual spindle. Now, the length of the spindle really depends on what you're going to mount this to. I use plywood purely and simply because I want to do all the pyrography, and it works absolutely brilliant with the pyrography. So when I was searching around for these movements, some of the listings actually list the length of the thread, some don't. And even the ones that do list them, they could be as thin as 6mm, which is, to be honest, far too thin. I only use 3.6mm plywood, and this particular thread is 9mm, and that's just ideal for that thickness of plywood. Now, the other thing as well for on the movement that you need to consider is this thickness, and again I think they are all fairly standard, but just in case, it was the mistake I made on my first clock. Once you've got obviously your movement, you can then work out really what size you want to start doing your segment ring and how you want to mount this. Now, the thing I found with the plywood was the very first piece I did, it was actually really hard to get a nice clean cut without tear out and everything all on the edges. So that really means that you definitely want to mount it from behind. Now, with mounting it from the back, it means that you've got to have some form of a lip on the top. And with your movement sticking out like that, the hands are only going to go so high above the actual clock face. What I found is it's best then to actually have your rim outside the width of the hands, rather than having a really thick rim and maybe the hands going over the top. Once you've decided on the size that you want for the inner rim, is then when you can actually start doing your planning. Now, the way I actually work out all these calculations, there is an online calculator on a web page where you can actually put in all your various dimensions and work that way. Now, that works fairly well, but it's limited input of what you can put in, and anybody who knows me fairly well will know that I actually hate wasting wood. So with the calculator, you would actually normally put your inside and outside diameter or the ring width, and it would then tell you then need to go and cut a piece of wood, say for example 20mm wide. Now, my wood might not be 20mm, I might in actual fact only have 16mm, or I might have 25mm. So I want to be able to plan all around those sizes. I actually created my own form of calculations on a spreadsheet. Now hopefully I will have this so that it's downloadable somewhere. If there's no links below and you are really interested in it, drop me a message and then I'll see if I can email it over to you. It's a very small, simple spreadsheet. You will need Excel in order to open it and to use it. But what I've done is I've actually created various different types of calculations. So some are based on, well, if I cut my length to a certain length on the outside length, have a certain wood thickness, what will be all the dimensions? So that is how I tend to plan most of my work now. Now the other thing you've also got to take into consideration as well, as like with these clocks, I've actually put these little extra wooden inserts in, so they don't account for in the calculator. So I think really with my segment calculator is that it's more of a case that you really need to work on the basis of what your minimum inside diameter should be once you've turned it down. Now certainly allow for a bit of extra waste, because you will need to do that. And obviously the other thing as well is that you don't want to be too big, because it's got to fit on top of your lathe. Now because I don't like to waste wood, I often look at my wood pile and just see what wood I've got there to suit the project. So I've just been a little while ago just looking through what I've got there, and I found this length of Iroko, fairly thin. I've also found some sapele as well, which I've got up there. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to basically plane these all up. Now I don't normally plane them all up, I would normally then just go off and cut the segments. So planed all these up, and they're all roughly probably about 24mm by 14mm. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to use the 25mm as the width of the piece. So where my segments are normally like that, the 25mm will be that way, and they'll only be 14mm high, which will allow me to stack up probably 3 levels. Now you can cut your segments various ways. When I first started I used to use just me electronic mitre chop saw, and it did a fairly reasonable job, but it wasn't overly accurate however much you tried. No reason why you can't use a hand mitre saw, but after I bought the table saw, one of the first things I did was actually make up this mitre sled, and there is a video online on how to make this, and it's really good and detailed, and I would certainly suggest going for the double armed mitre like this. I don't think so far I've cut anything which is totally 100% accurate. If you imagine you're doing 12 segments like that, I mean, even if you're only 0.1 of a degree out, by the time you've done your 12 segments, that's 2.4 degrees you could be out, because you're obviously doing a cut each side, and 2.4 degrees is actually quite a lot. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to change these around so that rather than having that sort of pattern where they're all equal, I'm going to exaggerate them a bit like that one. I'm going to loosen these off, so I'm going to put that one so that it is literally 90 degrees to the base, and hopefully I can then feed this one in so that we've got 30 degrees that way. Tighten them down, and that should produce some interesting segments. Now the other thing I also do as well is I always mark the top with a squiggly line or some line of some sort, and I always mark one edge. And the reason for that is that when you're flipping these this way, you keep your piece of wood the same way, but when you put the pieces back together, you want to alternate them. Now what I've done is I've worked out on my spreadsheet that if I cut segments at about 60mm, then my internal radius of my segmented ring, once it's been turned down to true, should be roughly about 180mm, which is what I need for a minimum for clearance on the clock hands. So what I'm looking for is 60mm from the edge of the blade hold that in place and screw it down. I will chop the snipe off first properly on this bottom piece, and then after that it's a case of flipping backwards and forwards. So that is what our segments are going to look like, and like I say, you do have to sand these up afterwards just to get rid of the edges. So the idea is that then they're all going to go round like that. That's our 12 segments, and it's just a case of putting all your lines on the top. And then sorting them out for what's inside and outside. Inside, 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 inside. And then it's just a case of alternating them around. As we go, I'm going to go off, cut the sapele and the other Rocco. So we've got all of our segments cut now, and all I'm looking at doing now is to get rid of any fuzzies off them. So I just go over all 6 sides, just double check them, and through, in this case, all 36 pieces. And I'll probably do this on a time lapse and then come back to you. I used to use a board just to glue everything up on, and the last one I did, I actually just used ordinary baking paper. I also used to use a blooming great big Jubilee clip to clamp everything together, which is fine. Again, the wood tends to pull a bit, and because things are not usually 100% accurate, you end up having to do it in 2 halves and spaces and come back to it anyway. So what I've found is that thanks to Stephen's 8x6 workshop, on one of his recent videos, he used what he calls the 20-second rule. And the idea is you put your glue on your pieces, hold them together in place for 20 seconds, and then they should be stuck together. I've got 3 identical sets here, 2 Rocco and 1 sapele, and I can't really mix them up on a thirds, because I thought, well, I was going to do individual bands of a Rocco sapele and a Rocco on the top in that sort of format, I think what I'm actually going to do, I'm going to mix them up so that they're mixed up on the same level, sort of like that, and then do the same for the next level. But because I've only got obviously 12 sapele, and some are short lengths, some are long lengths, I can't put them on all three levels. Start to glue these up. So like I say, I mean, I need to do 2, 3, 4. I need to do them in pairs like that. And then obviously the pairs there as well for those, and then the Iroko ones are full set on its own. So I'll just go through the process here. I mean, that is a nice fit on there. Just in case your two pieces together, and I find it's probably the easiest way, stick them level, use your finger, it's far quicker and just as easy. And this is where it's handy having a clock, and I'll put them where I want to leave them, rub them backwards and forwards until they bind, and then just literally hold them in place for 20 seconds. Now this is where it's handy having a clock in your workshop which has got the second hand on it, which is the reason why I actually made my clock, what was it, 2 years ago now. And I tend to give these probably nearer 30 seconds rather than 20. I mean, that's 20 now, and that's done. You can leave that on there to dry. Next to, and what you'll find is by the time you've probably gone through all these, you can probably pick up those first ones and just tidy them up just to get rid of all the glue spillage. So it's only been 5 minutes, and I mean, this glue is going off pretty quickly. I mean, it's 30 degrees in here today, and as you'll see, you should by rights be able to peel these off the paper just like that, and see that that glue has gone fairly hard already. Just tidy those top edges up a bit. I will carry on during the week, and I basically want to glue 3 of these sections together so I get 2 lots of 6. When I've got them in 6s, as in half a circle, half a ring, then I will come back to you. Now I left these overnight to dry off and came out this morning, and first of all I glued them up into 2s. Sorry, the 2 2s I then glued up into 4s like this. Now I did my usual mistake here, got a bit too keen, and I did the whole lot as 4s, whereas really I wanted to be able to get to 6 pieces. So I then since did that. Now the reason I usually do 6 pieces is because if you've only got 6 pieces there, usually from there to there is parallel, but because I've done these such acute angles, as you can see, if we run across there, I would be up there rather than down there. Had I done an ordinary equal angle on both sides, it would have been parallel across there, and therefore what you can do when you've got a half like that, you can actually just sand it all flat on a surface. These haven't come out too bad. I don't know whether it's shown on the camera there, but I do actually have a slight angle on both of these pieces where I've got a gap on the inner side on both sides there. So what I'm going to do, and I mean you can do this manually with a bit of sandpaper or anything like that, but obviously it's a lot more harder work, especially when you've got hardwood involved. I'm going to flip back and forth between here and the bench sander, and I'm just going to basically make it so that these all tie up nicely. So quick sand there, and they're now all nicely lined up, all three of them. So it's just a case of the final glue up. And I would suggest, if you haven't got a bench sander, do make a disc sander to go on your lathe, which I will cover in the next part of this series. So that's the end of part one, just really on how I plan and cut my segments. It's not necessarily the right way to do it, it's the way I like to do it. And I've got to say that gluing them up this way I found a lot better. And I'll also say as well, having all your wood square has given me such a lot better results on this that you'll see in part two it's going to be a lot easier to work on these than I would normally do. So just to reiterate, the important part before you start planning everything to make a clock like this, buy your movement first. That is the key part of the whole thing as to really what you do with all this and really the rest of the project. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you on the next part.